All right, good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar focused on driving contextual experiences in the increasingly anonymous era. Before we dive in, I want to call attention to the Questions tab on your screen. Please feel free to use this feature anytime throughout the discussion, and our presenters will address these at the end. Now I'd like to go ahead and introduce today's presenters. Andrew Jones is an industry analyst whose research and consultancy focuses on how companies can take advantage of disruptive technologies. Andrew has a deep knowledge of the marketing technology landscape, including customer identity and personalization. His experience includes roles at top-tier analyst firms, VentureBeat, and Altimeter Group. Jay Calavas is Chief Innovation Officer at Tealium and has more than 15 years of experience in the digital marketing space. Jay is responsible for driving brand awareness and adoption of Tealium's customer data platform globally. His experience across the digital marketing ecosystem includes ExactTarget, Touch Commerce, Visual Sciences, and Website Stories. And from there, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you, Andrew, to kick things off.
Great. Thank you so much, Becky. I am really excited to be talking today about a topic that is near and dear to my heart and is a really big opportunity for marketers today. About 97% of website visitors are anonymous. So that means for most companies, only 2 to 3% of the audience shares an email address or in some other way identifies themselves. And for any of you with mobile apps, the reality is pretty similar. Unless you require a login, you have a membership site or a membership application, most of those users are anonymous. Now, in spite of that reality, most marketers target the tiny minority of known prospects with most of their marketing efforts. And they mostly, on the other hand, ignore that vast majority, the so-called anonymous group. And the result is that most of that huge group is lost forever. Web and mobile engagement has to evolve really in the same way that email marketing has, from a batch and blast type situation to a much more segmented and personalized communication, especially because as consumers, we expect greater relevance, and as marketers, we have to deliver on that. And with the right technology, it's actually possible today to understand, to segment, and engage our anonymous audience in a way that it's never been possible before. And by more meaningful engaging this majority of our audience, we can significantly grow leads, increase conversions, and even decrease future churn. So this isn't necessarily a new topic. It's not like marketers have just discovered that so much of their audience is anonymous. But historically, marketers have started with meaningful marketing efforts only once a user was known. So it's primarily after an email was given and then email marketing or direct mail was started. Sure, we may have tried to make generalizations about what people are interested in based on anonymous data, perhaps segmenting that by different personas, but very few marketers have tried to understand and engage individual anonymous users. Instead, we've historically tried to get people to provide email addresses. To register for a webinar, to sign up for a newsletter, and there's obviously value there, so it's not like that's misguided, but an email address is just one data point of a number of data points that's possible to gain for a given profile. There are thousands of possible data points. It doesn't necessarily tell us more than many of those other data points that are available today. So while most companies today begin to build user profiles only once they have an email address, anonymous profiles can actually be built much earlier and actually have a lot more data than just known profiles. So it's kind of counterintuitive, but an anonymous profile can be far more detailed than a known one. And a lot of the richest data is actually behavioral data in particular, and none of that requires a profile to be known. You don't need to know someone's name, you don't need to know someone's phone number or their email address. You can just track what they're doing, what they're clicking on, how long they spend on certain pages, or how little they spend on other pages, how often they return to the site, whether they put something into the cart, what that product was, if they download anything. And you can very quickly learn a lot about their interests and intents, and you can use that to build very detailed profiles, even if they do start as anonymous. So in short, known does not necessarily equate to better or more complete. And in fact, if you build profiles for all users at the start, then for those few where you do get an email address down the road, you already have a detailed profile to use for much better segmentation. And on the other hand, if you only build profiles for known users, you face the so-called cold start problem. So you have pretty much empty profiles once you begin to enrich them if you're only starting after you get an email address. So what's different today? The ability to capture, to unify, and to utilize all of this data together using anonymous data primarily from web and mobile offers this opportunity for more contextually relevant engagement in all channels. It's not just email, but it's ads, website content, mobile engagement, and you don't have to be Amazon to do it. In a moment, we'll talk about some use cases, and I know that Jay actually has plenty to elaborate on there, and he has some case studies in particular. But there's one other important data point that needs to be kind of fleshed out, and that's, we've talked about known versus anonymous data, and that known does not necessarily equate to better, but there's an important distinction between first and third-party data as well. So third-party data is common, especially for advertising, but marketers have really increasingly questioned the quality of third-party data. And the challenge is essentially this. Third-party data attributes, like gender, are almost entirely probabilistic. And that means they amount to essentially a bunch of best guesses. And compounding that problem, third-party data provides really very little clues as to its accuracy because there's no transparency when it comes to that data. If you're relying on someone else's best guess, though, you don't want to be in the dark in terms of how good the quality of that data is. So especially when attributes like gender have been shown to be wrong nearly half of the time, it's very important to question the accuracy of that data and whether you want to be using it. First-party data, on the other hand, is reliable. It's your data, after all. And a whole lot of people seem to make the mistake of thinking that first-party refers only to your known data, the known users, but first-party really just means that it's your data. So that's just as much for the known users or visitors as it is for the anonymous audience. So considering the data options here, in the upper right we have first-party known data. So you own it and it's accurate. And most of it is deterministic data, so there's no guesswork about any of it. But while the data quality is very good, the problem here is scale. This is, again, it's only applying to like 2 or 3% of your audience. And contrasting with that, in the bottom left, we have third-party anonymous data, which has basically the opposite problem. We've got massive scale. This is data available from across the World Wide Web, but data quality is questionable and not transparent. So now let's look at anonymous first-party data. It's your data, so it's reliable, and you've also got pretty good scale because it includes everyone who hits your site and who uses your mobile app. And it's also specific to your property in a way that aggregated third-party simply can't be. I mean, your product categories, your site architecture is unique, and what your visitors or users might be engaging with is ultimately unique to your property. And even if you make some assumptions of your own with regard to your first-party data, you know exactly what factors go into determining a data point like this person is probably male or female. So this is all to make the case for relying much more heavily on first-party anonymous data for understanding and engaging your customers and prospects across really all channels, because it doesn't have to stay in that silo. It can be used across a variety of channels. So okay, that's all good and well, but how can you actually use anonymous data? How do we benefit from this? Well, for anonymous visitors, we can reach them with greater contextually relevant experiences in ads, on the website, and in their mobile devices. And we can also use anonymous data to create richer profiles for known users, which means better segmentation for email and direct mail as well. And in terms of engaging our anonymous audience, there are a number of options across channels. Right, as you can see, we'll talk about them a bit more in greater detail, but many of these will be familiar to many of you. You may use some of them, but today most of these use cases are really one-off. For example, a retargeting vendor will collect just the data it requires for retargeting. So that means that the data is collected in and really used in a silo, separate from all your other tools. Data isn't getting shared across, all of your other tools that you have that are across your site. And actually, Tealium and an e-consultancy did a study in 2015 that found that over half of organizations were using more than 20 different digital marketing solutions, which really is just confirmation of what we already knew, that we're using a lot of tools. And each of these tools, like analytics, A/B testing, e-commerce, heat mapping, CMS, content management, live chat, retargeting, and others, they all collect data. But this data sits in distinct silos. And the result is this kind of disparate view of visitors rather than a unified one. And I know you're all familiar with the story of the blind man and the elephant. Each blind man feels just one part of this elephant, the trunk, the ear, the tail, the foot, and none of it is accurate on its own when it comes to trying to understand what this actually is. And it's essentially an analogy for marketers today. Without a consolidated profile for each visitor or user, marketers end up with really a distorted and often conflicting view of who their users and visitors are. And so the result is less accurate and less effective marketing. Okay, so back to those use cases, so we can really understand the value of using anonymous data in particular. So with advertising, we can retarget visitors based on on-site behaviors. Might include those visitors who abandon their shopping carts, who have returned to the site several times, are perhaps in a specific location, or what the weather is in that location, or maybe they've displayed interest in a specific product category, or even a specific product. And beyond just retargeting visitors, Facebook and Google allow marketers to target lookalike audiences as well. So marketers can reach new prospects similar to existing segments. If you have certain audience members that you identified to be in certain parts of the funnel, then you can target additional audiences based on those attributes. So if you have a good idea of which audience members are valuable, then you can find more of them. In terms of the website, websites today are like old school email marketing. Basically, again, going back to batch and blast, where everyone sees essentially the same content. But, email marketing has evolved, yet websites have been relatively stagnant. Websites have a number of ways to engage visitors in much more relevant ways, and here are a few of them. So testing and personalization tools like Optimizely, for example, they offer the ability to adjust content visitors see based on anonymous attributes and behaviors. You don't need to know who they are, just what they're doing and potentially what they're interested in. And each visitor or segment can be shown much more relevant content if you know enough about them and what to show them. You have the content. And it can be fairly automated too, because you might have thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of visitors. It can be automated and done at scale. And greater web personalization has definitely been shown to move a greater number of visitors further down the funnel, resulting in more qualified leads and conversions. And along those same lines, product recommendations can use behavior-based affinity to show more relevant products. And live chat, similarly, can be made more specific to that individual based on, what that person has been engaging with. And it's not just website and advertising, but mobile as well, which is becoming more and more important. Anonymous mobile users, for most of us, are the majority of our audience. So mobile users can similarly be segmented based on their in-app data or activity, like the number of times they open the app, which features or parts of the app they use most frequently, and again, other factors like location. Mobile users, they can also be engaged. This is perhaps a less common use case, but they can also be engaged based on external beacons. So, if a user has your app installed and moves around a location with iBeacons, like a mall or a conference potentially, they can be sent push notifications based on where they go or what they've seen. And it doesn't require any kind of authentication. Or even an active session. You just need the app to be installed and push notifications to be on. So a lot of different options here. Okay, so we've seen a number of options on the anonymous side, but this data can also be used to enrich known profiles, as I mentioned earlier. So in this case, it actually can be just as valuable or more so. By beginning to build user profiles with anonymous data, marketers, again, they can address that cold start problem that they otherwise face. So most marketers start building user profiles only once a user becomes known, right? Which means these profiles begin with very limited data, no historical or behavioral context. But if you're instead building profiles as soon as visitors reach the website, then you ultimately have much richer, more complete profiles. You have all this rich behavioral data by the time a visitor actually provides an email address. So those details can be used for more accurate, more refined email segmentation or for direct mail, just as well as for any of the anonymous use cases. So comparing anonymous and known visitors is really not a black and white comparison. It's customer identity today is a spectrum. An email address is just one of many data points, thousands of potential data points. So anonymous data, especially when you consider the behavioral aspects of anonymous data, is very, very valuable and really simply too valuable to ignore. So finally, what do we need to achieve these use cases effectively and efficiently? So in short, we're talking about better data and having it faster. We're talking about earlier data collection, starting when visitors first reach your website. You want this data to be not only collected in real time, but available in real time. And you need this to be consolidated data rather than in different silos. So Jay can talk about this in much greater detail than I can, and not only provide some more color, but also a number of use cases. So Jay, at this point, I'll hand it over to you.
Great, thanks, Andrew. Really appreciate the content, and I'm going to dig a little bit deeper into this topic. But first off, just wanted to point out, in that study with e-consultancy, we actually interviewed over 1,000 elephants, and they do mostly feel misunderstood. So we've got a long way to go as digital marketers. So we're certainly going to touch on that today. So, from our perspective, the term anonymous when it comes to marketing needs to be redefined because of this huge surge in first-party data collection capabilities. The intersection of technology is finally met with the prowess of our digital marketing strategies, and we can have that data set in order to engage our visitors. So the whole concept of anonymous is being redefined very quickly. The historical approach, as you spoke to, Andrew, really was, if anything, gathering data in that anonymous tail leading up to an actual conversion that was very specific per use case. For example, a retargeting vendor may grab some data about the products that you browsed, or a live chat tool might look at how long you're sitting on a page. but those tiny fragments of data didn't ever come to fruition when that user became known. And so for most brands, they finally get to know their customer when they finally convert or identify themselves, and then begins the process of building up that data set. Lots of different vendors have tried to solve for this, and you spoke a little bit about third-party data and specifically the DMPs and DSPs out there. Third-party data was the best we had for a long, long time, and so as marketers, we used it to the best of our abilities. First-party data is creating a whole new world of identity and putting third-party data, we believe, in the shadows. It's used for very specific use cases like top-of-funnel marketing, just trying to find net new eyeballs for your brand or for your marketing campaign, and then for lookalike audienceing as well. But probabilistic data is very challenging to use. As you mentioned, it's a bunch of guesswork, and it's mostly inaccurate. And if we can gather first-party data and use it for our marketing needs, that really is the right approach. This huge web of complexity has created a big problem for digital marketers. It all started with those pesky little JavaScript tags that are all grabbing bits and pieces of data and sending them off to different homes so they can be used for different purposes. Third-party cookie pools started to create this fragmented, blurry view of who consumers actually were for the purpose of typically remarketing, but also then for top-of-funnel marketing. Then you have all these different siloed data sets, of which have great purpose for a particular use case, but ultimately companies today are struggling with getting all those different silos back into a single place so that they can get that full 360 view of their consumer. That entails massive batch processing, which can result in a really lagging view of your consumer, and it may be too late by the time you get that view consolidated. Your consumer is off and running, and as we all know, the folks we're trying to engage with in this day and age are pretty distracted. They've got a lot going on. They've got a lot of options for how they want to spend their time and their money. And ultimately, our number one currency as marketers is data, which is a great thing when you start thinking about the power and ease of collection around first-party data. The first piece to untangling that web is creating a deterministic key ring, or a group of unique identifiers that we can use to stitch together one person across multiple devices and data sets. Imagine one user, let's say with a work computer that has two different web browsers. They have a tablet, they have a cell phone. All of these different tools potentially are in different states of anonymous identification. Add to that offline behaviors like point of sale, and you've got yourself a really complex web, if you will. The big problem with untangling this is that almost all vendors have leaned on this notion of a primary key. So if you look at, for example, a marketing cloud like Adobe or Oracle or IBM, they have this whole concept of a marketing cloud ID, one ID to identify a user across multiple tools, right? So most of these vendors have gone out and bought a bunch of different tools, and now they're trying to make one identity known across 3, 4, 5 different tools. The problem with that is that without that unique key, which typically only shows up after authentication, which we all know is a challenge all in itself, you're never going to be able to correlate that picture of that user. So this notion of a key ring gives us a tremendous amount of opportunity to correlate devices and data sets and find the highest match rate possible. Now, many of these keys that we're talking about have nothing to do with authentication, right? All of the vendors that you're using already drop first-party cookies. Data about a purchase or about an experience can be used so long as it's identified directly to a user. Great example is somebody who downloads a coupon from the web and then goes into a store and uses it. That coupon code can be associated back to a browser and a human being. And when that user uses that coupon in the store, and that point of sale system creates a file of all the sales that happened that day, you can now find a match about that coupon code, which is just another key in the key ring, and voila, you've got yourself an omni-channel data set about your online and offline experience for that individual person. So this concept of a key ring is a new concept and one that we believe will become increasingly popular, but companies need to be thinking about identification in even the anonymous world by building out this key ring as quickly as possible. The first-party data set really does bring us into the future. Now, the key to this is getting to that first-party data as quickly as possible. This isn't easy. Most companies rely on a CRM system or a web analytic tool to collect data from a website or a mobile app, right? So your Google Analytics or whatever your enterprise analytics tool might be is collecting that data and aggregating it into reports, which you use to analyze what's happening with your brand. Now, along with that data set that's being sent to analytics, you've got data going off to N number of vendors. On average, we find 15 to 50 different vendor tags running on the average website, sending off data. And all of those different vendors are getting a different bit of data and therefore a different view of your customer. That leads to a really challenging approach to engaging that user in a consistent manner. Typically, companies are pretty clumsy in the way that they engage customers across different marketing tools. The display ad and the web experience and the live chat and the A/B test and the search experience that I have are all completely different because they're all dealing with a different view of that consumer. Now, if we can get ahead of that, and there's a new category of tools called customer data platforms, if we can get ahead of that fragmentation problem and begin collecting that data at its source, now what we've got is a single view of the consumer that's primed for engagement across many different marketing channels. Now, keep in mind, this is still what typically used to be considered an anonymous user. First-party data throws that term out the window. We know exactly who this person is. Now, I can't call them by name, and I can't send them an email, and I can't call them on their phone. But digital marketing solutions, all they need is data in order to engage that user. So it's got a bunch of different channels that Andrew highlighted, but just to bring it back to light, if we have a single powerful view of a visitor based on first-party data, and you've got integrations that can take advantage of that data, you can engage that user in an incredibly personalized way. And again, we don't know typically the name or the email address, but gosh, we've got an awful lot of intelligence so we can engage that user right now. So this is the end of the anonymous profile and the beginning of our ability to achieve the ultimate goal of omni-channel marketing, right? No matter where your consumer is, whether they're on a web, or if they're in a mobile app, or if they're in store, or they're at a kiosk, or they're being tracked by an iBeacon, or they're engaging with a set-top box, doesn't really matter. What matters is the extensibility of your collection mechanism, the ability to collect that first-party data, and then, of course, the vendors that you choose to use that data with. And so those are two keys when evaluating how to achieve this goal. You got to look at the extensibility of the collection footprint first, and second, what vendors can I use this data with? Two really important selection criteria. Now, omni-channel marketing, how do we achieve this? First things first, we need a common way to collect data about our consumers. So getting a little technical, but there's this concept of a data layer, and a data layer was defined by a bunch of vendors out in the space by the W3C group, and it's a well-documented approach to standardizing data collection online, mobile apps, and even now it's extending into offline. Create a common data dictionary so you can always collect data in a common way. That way, correlating that data across multiple channels is much, much easier. Now, we also have to be able to collect this data in real time. Batch processing is damaging our ability to engage our customer with the right message at the right time. 24 hours is too long, and we like to talk about the 24-hour flu here at Tealium. Once a day has gone by, your chances of using that data for any kind of a meaningful engagement to enhance your brand and to convert that user to do your call to action is very limited. So real-time collection, and then, of course, the stitching, enrichment, and segmentation of that data should all be done on the front end as well. Don't put data into a system, segment it, and then a day later send out an email campaign or start retargeting that user. Do it right now based on behavior, right? And then it's all about that ecosystem of partners that you can use. So most of the folks on this phone, I would guess, have built their own marketing cloud. You went out and evaluated all sorts of technologies, and based on your experiences and the aptitude of the sales folks on the other end of the phone, you've made decisions, and you've bought a hodgepodge of tools. The ability to plug all those tools into this first-party data set and get them to work together is key to the viability of this approach. So think about the ecosystem that you've chosen and the one that you'll be using a year or two from now, which I guarantee will be completely different, and the interoperability of those tools and accessing that first-party data set. And then, wow, we've got all this great first-party data. You have to be able to close the loop, right? Supplementing your customer analytics with this first-party data. So lots of companies use web analytics, which are aggregated reports about the performance of your content or your campaigns. But we need to start to think about visitor analytics. This is what CRM systems used to do, but it's important to know on a per-user basis what we know about them, what we're learning about them right now, and how they're reacting to our brand. And that leads to the ability to truly engage in customer lifecycle marketing. So data layer standards, they're documented on the web by W3C. We can certainly point you in that direction. If you have any questions about that, the folks at Tealium have some experts around W3C standards and creating a data layer. Tealium, personally, we have turnkey integrations with the majority of content management systems and e-commerce platforms out there that pre-configures your data layer, so it takes a lot of the guesswork and labor out of that. But this is a standard way to make sure you're collecting as much of that valuable first-party data as close to the source as possible and as close to real-time as possible. The data layer application allows you to first and foremost define that data. So as it's being created on your website or your mobile app, what is it that we're trying to capture? Well, I want to know what page somebody's on. I want to know what campaign they came from. I want to understand how long they're on the website. It's important to me to know how far down the funnel they are, etc. Now, once we've defined that data, we now have control of that data. I can decide how to collect it and how to share it. So the data layer is an unbelievably powerful layer of your digital marketing stack that gives you control of the data. And then ultimately, the enrichment of that data is what leads to meaningful insights. So that's great that you just bought something from me, but let's increment that into a per customer persisted lifetime value. And let me understand what your favorite product category is over N number of sessions that you've had with my brand, etc. So data layer leads to defining your data, controlling it, and the ultimate enrichment of that data. And then on the back end, we have this stitching and enriching process. So data is coming from all different sources, websites, different browsers, mobile apps, and then offline data sets. Every company probably has an old CRM database. They'd love to onboard and activate that data so they can use it for digital marketing. This concept is starting from the very beginning of your visitor journey, taking all the data that you're learning and knowing about them, and then engaging that user from the moment we meet them to the day they die. And hopefully they use our brand to the day they die, right? As it turns out, we knew that visitor, soon to be customer, all along. They were never really anonymous. And thanks to first-party data, we'll always have that relationship with our customer. Now we've got a detailed customer journey. The second we meet someone, we know what they're doing, what their intent is, how serious of a shopper they may be. Are they really interested in our brand? My gosh, they're reading all these blogs. They really like our white papers. They've liked us. All these things, these sentiment elements become incredibly powerful first-party insights about our soon-to-be customer. So collecting on the front end sets us up for a better initial experience with our customer, but long-term, that data just keeps on getting collected, which leads to meaningful insights and a great long-term relationship. The actionability of this data is key. So lots of vendors talk about collecting all this data and using it for their own purpose, right? So I'm a product recommendation engine. I'm going to collect lots of data, and I'm going to use it to create product recommendations. Well, that's excellent, but that doesn't help me with my other 10 marketing channels that I'm trying to use. I came across a great use case yesterday. I was on site with a customer, and we were talking about retargeting. And it's a really simple use case. User comes onto a website, they start researching a really high-value product, but then they end up buying something. Most retargeting vendors, if the conversion completes, don't have the ability to look at what that user was browsing and retarget them on that other product, right? Let's say that high-value product doesn't get bought, but you know what? I bought some small widget. Well, we still want to have that intelligence to retarget that user, and not just to retarget them on that high-value product, but also to feed that data back into all of our other marketing channels, right? Let's bid them up on search and SEO. Let's make sure that when they come back to the site, they see that product and get a custom experience because they've got a really high-value product that's top of mind, and engage them at the right time. The only way we can do that is by having tremendous access to the digital marketing ecosystem. Our friend Scott Brinker talks a lot about this MarTech explosion. He's got that nauseating diagram that keeps us all up at night. We've got 3,500 different vendors. How in the world do we get one single view of data off to that ever-increasing realm of vendors? It's all about centralizing data and working with a vendor that focuses on that. It's not your job anymore. There are companies that can help you with that process. Just some quick use cases because everyone likes use cases. A company called Ancestry.com. They're an interesting brand. Everyone knows they're the masters of genealogy, and you can find out all the great secrets about your heritage through their brand. But, third-party data doesn't really work for them, right? So they were working with DMPs, and it was hard to find a correlation between, somebody's browsing behavior and their interest in genealogy. And furthermore, they were finding huge delays in the way that they could do digital marketing. So for them, those moments of truth are incredibly important. They find someone who's interested and they need to act right now because, Ancestry.com is definitely a nice to have. It's not something you have to have. And so at that moment, it's all about engaging that user. They replaced their batch and manual processes with our customer data platform. Again, there's lots of them out there, but ours in particular. And they improved their retargeting based on anonymous data from an entire day into seconds by using first-party data. And by doing that, they saw a 15 times ROI through increased conversions. Using that moment of truth and that incredible first-party data that they had previously not been using, next thing you know, they're moving the needle and they're driving results. Similar case study with Patagonia. They are using the customer data platform to do the same type of retargeting. They're using search and display ad. They're bidding up in real time on people's browsing behavior when it comes to value of product and seeing tremendous conversion as well. So that's all we had for you folks today. Thanks so much for the time. Really appreciate it, and I hope it was a good conversation.
Yes, we'll just end on a couple of quick questions before we end here. Andrew, the first one I'm going to throw over to you. One of our attendees was hoping for just a bit more information on SEO as part of the website anonymous use case example you gave. Could you just elaborate on that a bit?
Sure. Yeah, I probably kind of glossed over that one. But yeah, I mean, to the extent that you can understand what your audience is interested in, what they're doing, you can segment them and you can create the right copy, the right SEO for a variety of different landing pages based on that segmentation. So landing pages and specific different segments of the site based on that segmentation.
Yeah, and that's actually what Patagonia is doing, right? So these users are anonymous. They're coming to the website based on the value of the products they're browsing. They're bidding up on those users in Google AdWords. So, and by the way, part of the ability to do that has to do with the way in which you're engaging with these different networks. So, for Tealium specifically, we've built one-to-one integrations with the DoubleClick and Google Ad Network, with Facebook, with Yahoo, with all these different tools. So we don't have to rely on third-party data. We build first-party relationships between our customer data platform and those different networks. So it's a great use case for sure around first-party data activation.
Awesome. Thank you both. We'll take one more, and Jay, I'm going to direct this one to you, and Andrew, feel free to chime in if you have anything to add. But there seem to be a number of technologies that talk about this ability to leverage first-party data and connect first-party data points. specifically in the DMP space. Can you talk a little bit about that perceived overlap?
Yeah, it's a confusing time out there. You can go to 1,000 websites and they all have the same exact messaging around them. And I think everyone's got the same vision around identification. The problem is majority of vendors weren't built from the ground up to solve this problem. There's this great concept of the quadrants of customer engagement. It's another webinar that we did previously, and this notion that all these vendors like marketing automation and DMPs and display ad networks and search vendors and product recommendations, they're all in these outer regions of a quadrant, and they're all trying to move closer to the center to own more and more of the customer data, because that's naturally what we need to be doing. That's what we're talking about here, this concept of first-party data. The problem is none of them were built to be that centralized platform to do that. So DMPs are a great example of where they've pretty much relied solely on third-party data and now are beginning to tout their ability to blend in first-party data. The problem is you've got third-party data that's probabilistic, you've got first-party data that's deterministic, and now you're dealing with this shady view of your consumer, and you're still typically just using it for your acquisition or ad spend type use cases. And so while the talk track may be very similar, customer data platforms are built from the ground up to focus solely on collecting data from all customer touch points and activating that across all marketing channels. So the talk track is the same, and it's tough for marketers out there. You go to any trade show and literally you can read the copy on every booth, and it's pretty similar. So ultimately, seeing the technology actually working and solving your use cases is the best way to differentiate from my perspective.
Well, yeah, and there's also the distinction of data collection itself, whereas, the DMPs, it's not a way to actually collect the data. It's a place where you can unify the data potentially, but in terms of the data collection, that's not being answered there.
That's right, and I think that's why Tealium, of course, started as a tag management company, but our ultimate goal was never to be the worldwide leader in tag management. We knew the customer data platform was the problem that we needed to solve for, but having that collection matrix in place, that data layer, solves for the collection, enrichment, stitching, and activation problem. It's the right way to do it, and any vendor that didn't grow up from the roots of tag management and with a data layer is at a severe disadvantage.
Yeah, it's automating more of the process, so you're avoiding a lot of the headaches and a lot of the time delays in terms of having that data actually be actionable at the end too, because like you said, intent only lasts so long. If you're having to batch data or manually unify the data, enrich data, et cetera, then you're losing time and your marketing is not going to be as efficient if you're not reaching someone in the moment that they're looking for something.
Perfect. Well, I'd like to thank you so much to everyone for joining, and thank you to our presenters for such a great discussion. And we'll end it here. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all.